Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I'm delighted to be talking a second time with author, artist, comics creator Zander Cannon. Zander, thank you for jumping in, joining, and talking with me for a few
Abs-
minutes.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Well, thank you, thank you. Just morning coffee time, so thanks for having a morning cup with me here. And I'll mention a couple of titles that folks out there might know you for. We talked through some of them in our first chat. Kaijumax being one of those. Jana, is it Jana and the Impossible Monsters? Is that right?
Yeah, that's Chris and Laura Somney's series. I just did a cover for
Yes.
them. But
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yeah. I love it though because it's in that like young reader space. Love that the work
Oh
that you do
yeah.
there as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they knew I was ready to, at the a second's notice to just jump in and do a cover. They knew I was up for that for sure.
Yes, yes. You also have Double Barrel as well as Negative Burn being a
Oh
couple of
wow.
other works that are on the list from a
Yeah.
little while ago. A little while ago.
Yeah, Negative Burn is from at least 25 years ago, and then and then Double Barrel was the digital sort of anthology that Kevin Cannon and I, no relation, surprisingly,
Mhm, mhm.
used to serialize our novels in the early teens.
Yes, yes.
So
Yeah. I've been reading comics since I was 7, so I've got the long view here a little
right,
bit.
totally. You're like, oh yeah, that comic just came out in 1998.
That's right. That's right. Wasn't that yesterday? That seems like it was yesterday. So I think my first question for you the second time around was, you play this dual role as writer, as artist, and you probably have many other talents as well. You probably use a harmonica while you're creating. So
I can ride a unicycle. Does that count?
totally counts, totally counts. So I'm wondering what it's like to kind of live in both worlds creatively that way in comics.
I think that it only really counts as both worlds when you're doing like DC Comics or Marvel Comics, because then they really sort of are trying to sort of like regiment the process and make sure that it moves along really smoothly. And so you're taking up more time in the process.
Hmm.
But when I'm doing a graphic novel, a creator-owned graphic novel, I guess I sort of feel like it's one job, or the jobs, like the brain space that it takes up is pretty fluid. Like, oh yeah, there's definitely a brain space for writing, and coming up with what's going to happen and thinking in words, and there's a brain space for thinking in pictures, but they really blend. So
Hmm.
I'm working on a project now where it's, some scenes I'm writing the dialogue, and then I sort of pop the word balloons in on the page, no images, but I choose the panel size, and sometimes I'll choose the uh sort of the camera angle, so to speak, of the thing, and draw the visuals first, and then sort of say, all right, well, I know what they're basically going to say, but I'll work out the words later. So I mean, it's fluid in terms of what happens first. It's fluid in terms of what you're thinking of, because I'm doing it in different ways for different scenes. Um, and I mean, yeah, like I really like doing both, because I like that there's this feedback loop of like, well, I don't know exactly know what's going to happen in this scene. So I put these visuals down, I put these couple panels down, and it's like, all right, okay, now that's sort of starting to fall into place. And I know what this person will say now,
Hmm.
or, then sometimes you're like, okay, well, now let's continue this conversation. Oh, we're going to need a moment where we go in close on this person's face as they change their mind, or as they sort of realize something, or, so I like the, like I said, the feedback loop of being able to say like, well, does this look right? Does that look right? Does this sound good? What will go with this?
Yeah, yeah, very
So
cool, very cool. Lots of thinking in the process.
yeah. And I think that if I were a more detailed artist, like I think about, well, a good friend of mine, Gene Ha, like his art style is so elaborate, so photorealistic, and so detailed, and so labor intensive, crucially, that I feel like you only want to take one crack at that. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? I mean,
Hmm.
there's a lot of stuff that you can do in thumbnails and stuff, but I like to sort of be able to do a couple pages and fail a little bit and kind of go, oh, that didn't work, but let's see if we can remix this a little bit and move it around. And that's harder to do the more detailed your artwork is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, some of your process is kind of speaking to this next question, but as a reader, but also as a creator, what do you feel like makes comics kind of unique and special?
Well, I mean, I think from an audience point of view, comics is really sort of the one, not the one, but I mean, a like an art form that you kind of have to experience alone, because it's like you can read a novel to someone and you can watch a movie with someone and watch TV together, but comics are sort of something where it's like if you were reading it to someone, you kind of have to go, well, and then they say this and kind of looks like this, and like it's really awkward to do. And so I think that you control the pacing, you control all this stuff, and you are in this world, you're pulled into this little world by yourself. And I think uh, that's part of it. And then I also think, well, for years, Kevin Cannon and I did educational comics, and we were trying to explain concepts. There's a book on paleontology, there's a book on rhetoric, there's a book on genetics and evolution. And so when you're trying to explain sort of like abstract concepts, all of a sudden you can have a diagram
Hmm.
that sort of tells these things. I mean, it could be a Venn diagram, it could be a flow chart, or it could be any number of visual sort of representations of an idea. And then and it just fits right in. And you can have like little funny characters walking around on it, like it's a drawing on the floor or something. And I like that because instead of saying, in a wall of text that say see figure 1A and looking way over here, you can
Hmm.
kind of integrate it and say like, this is how it kind of feels. And I mean, and the fact that comics are more casual, they can sometimes be aimed at students with lower reading ability. It's so much more sort of welcoming in that way to me. And that's always how I've liked to learn, is visually, with explaining a concept in sort of an image. And yeah, so I think that the world is catching on to it fast. I mean, it's happened everywhere. It's in education all over the place. So
Hmm. Hmm. Well, you talking about sort of trying to use the visual and look here kind of thing. I'm just thinking about the times that I'll read aloud to a class, and if I read aloud from a graphic novel, it's got to be on the screen, or they have to have copies. Because if I'm trying to read, you get to panels that are wordless, or maybe there's like an action scene and it's like 2 minutes of grunting. If you don't explain that a little bit, and if you don't have that visual to kind of anchor that experience, students might be like, "Are you okay? You all right, dude? You okay?" Um, so
right.
there's
Why do you
absolutely
keep
that.
identifying yourself by name? Like, I, Dave Stewart, am going to
That's right.
do this, because I'm reading a Jack Kirby comic and that's how it goes.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Exactly. But it's fun form, fun tropes to play with on the teacher side as well, because you were mentioning the sort of the education that goes with comics.
Yeah. Yeah. My son's teacher asked me to come in and talk about comics a little bit because they were starting a graphic novel section. They were reading Persepolis.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and it's like, and I mean, it's like Persepolis is such a great example too, because I mean, those drawings are so simple, but like again, the feedback loop where it's like you are reading the words and absorbing the pictures at the exact same rate. There's
Hmm.
the words are simple, the drawings are simple, but it tells this hugely sort of complex and sort of interesting story. And I was like, I mean, you couldn't have chosen a better book, you know?
True. True, true. Yeah. Well, I have favorite teaching stories from Persepolis, but we'll keep it on
Okay,
point. Uh,
okay, all right, okay, good.
so, as far as sort of the creator side again, curious about one of the best lessons, one of the most important lessons you've learned from working in the industry.
Let's see. Yeah, some hard won wisdom, right? I mean, I think uh, well, actually one of the funny ones I learned and is that, so my book Heck, I did a book called Heck several years ago, that was about, used Dante's Inferno as a sort of a jumping off point.
Mhm.
And so there's this whole sequence where I used all the demons and all the characters that are in the Inferno for this. And so um uh there's a character of Geryon, who's sort of he's sort of a demon that's sort of halfway down, right? And
Mhm.
uh
Mhm.
and he's described in Dante as having the face of an honest man and then a body that extends to a scorpion-like stinger. Okay, and so he sort of gives people takes people from sort of the higher part of hell to the lower part of hell. And in the story, I used him as sort of like a really sort of like terrible villain. He's kind of a non-entity in most Inferno stories, but he has the scorpion-like stinger, and he carries people on his back to Dante's Inferno. And there's a scene, small spoiler, where he has sort of like he's done something so awful to the main character that the main character shoots him, and they both fall.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the backstory. But anyway, my friend is a college professor, and he was teaching this book in his class. It's sort of it's a graphics novel class, but it's also like a humanities class. And he wrote to me, and he was like, one of my students was asking about how this goes along with the Aesop's fable of the frog and the scorpion, because the same basic thing happens, except it's reversed because the scorpion-like character is the one carrying them. And I had to sort of say, I'm super embarrassed, but it never once crossed my mind. I mean, I've read Aesop's fables a million times. It never once crossed my mind. But that's not wrong. Like it's the same idea. It is interesting that it's reversed, that the scorpion-like character is the one who sort of like, the person is sort of like driven by rage or fate or whatever to kill them, just the way the scorpion in the fable is driven by their nature or whatever. And so I was like, I it's such a weird moment where you're like, well, I didn't intend that, but it's 100% a legitimate reading. And where does that exist? How does this, and the idea that this story kind of exists outside of me now. I mean, I'm not the same person I was when I wrote it 15 to 12 years ago. And so I thought that was such a fascinating thing to have happen. And I was happy to be able to say, like, yeah, you're right, but I have nothing to do with it.
Yeah. It's reading is so complex, and then when you add the visuals and you add all the other elements, there's a lot to take in for sure.
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that there's something very interesting about how the circumstances under which you make a comic. It's like, well, I mean, you might be under the gun, rushing deadline wise. You might be, you might be in a state of mind where you're depressed, or like there's so many things that, like, not everything is sort of like super well planned out, or sometimes you just put something on the page and you're like, looks good, and it's 5 o'clock, so
Yep. Yeah. So what's on the drawing table right now? Are there current projects that you can talk about? I see a whiteboard back there with
Yeah, actually, that was for a project that is on hold. I mean, I was doing this collaboration with my studio mates. We were just trying to figure out something that we could all do together, which would be really fun. It was, and since we're all writer artists, we wanted to collaborate in a way that you don't usually get to do when you aren't sort of like the four stops on the usual sort of workflow. But anyway, yeah, on my drawing table, or I'm working on a horror series. It's like it's the opposite of Kaijumax, which had 1,000 characters and full color and crazy visuals, and this one is very understated, very sort of grounded. It's black and white and red, and excuse me, and then it has like 3 characters. So it's interesting to go from this world in Kaijumax where there was all this sort of like slang and sort of world building and like wacky jokes and a gruesome story, of course. And this is just like very understated, very naturalistic, and yeah, and meant to freak you out, I guess. So
Definitely. We're looking forward to that.
Yeah, that should be out from Image this year, maybe. We'll see.
Cool. And I always like to ask, just in case people didn't check out the first episode, but curious about the spaces where people can connect online at conventions and things of that nature.
Well, I'll be at, I don't know when this is coming up, but yeah, in a couple of months, I'll be at C2E2. I'm going to go to, oh my gosh, Heroes Con in Charlotte. And then I go to San Diego every year, and then I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Blue Sky, and I'm on Instagram and Threads. And I'm still on Twitter if you must, but I don't really use it anymore. Yeah,
Yes,
it's wild that it's like it's got to be so many now, and
I
nothing
know.
sort of the clear front runner, you know?
I'm on these five, but not that one.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's pretty wild. Well, Xander, I always enjoy talking with you, always
absolutely.
enjoy talking through the process, and it's always nice to kind of peer into the studio space that you work in as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's tidy, tidy, neat as a pin, you know, like
Oh,
just like the
absolutely.
artist would want it to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, did we miss anything that you want to make sure to mention before we close?
No, I mean, I just yeah, just just plugging away here, you know, just making funny books. I mean, it's a great life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I enjoy reading the funny books that you make, so I appreciate it very much, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.